Hey, what's going on, guys? UFC 299 is right around the corner, and in the main event, we have Sean O'Malley versus Marlon Vera 2 for the bantamweight title. And this UFC 299 event is absolutely insanely stacked, and I've seen some people kind of questioning, you know what? UFC 299 is so stacked that it's better than UFC 300. It's because the UFC is trying to pretend that Sean O'Malley is a star that he isn't. They're trying to pretend that he's a draw that he isn't. And I'm here to tell you that that's not true. And there's something going on in 2024 with the UFC's pay-per-views that absolutely nobody is discussing. And we're going to break it down in detail in this video. And also, I dug up some clips of Dana White talking about Sean O'Malley's star power that I think a lot of people probably forgot about. And we're going to take a look at him in this video because he's blatantly lying in one of them, or bare minimum just being disingenuous. But we'll look at that in a second. Let's start off with UFC 299. Because UFC 299 is incredible. You look at the full card. Sean O'Malley versus Marlon Vera 2 for the bantamweight title. Co-main event, Dustin Poirier versus Benoit Saint-Denis. Featured fight on the card, Kevin Holland versus Michael Venum Page. Then you have Gilbert Burns versus Della Maddalena. Then opening up the card, Petr versus Song Yadong. That's the entire main card. That's not even taken into account. There's some really solid prelims. Curtis Blades versus Dalton Almeida. Mateusz Gamrot versus RDA. The list goes on and on and on. UFC 299 is absolutely incredible. It's not better than UFC 300. I've already broken that down. I'm not going to go too much into that. But anybody saying that UFC 299 is better than UFC 300 is smoking crack, okay? Just to put it lightly. It's just a complete lie. It's not true. Not pay-per-view to pay-per-view. Not full card to full card. 300 is leaps and bounds better than UFC 299. That doesn't change the fact that UFC 299 is absolutely amazing and stacked with incredible fights. But you have a lot of people saying it's Dana White privilege with Sean O'Malley. And, you know, I understand that Sean O'Malley does have Dana White privilege. We're going to talk about it quite a bit in this video. But it's not the reason that they're stacking this card. Sean O'Malley, what's crazy is you look at his resume, he got kind of an undeserved shot at Petr, even though I was 100% in favor with it, because I love when you take guys that have a lot of hype and get kind of thrown to the wolves. He got a robbery win over Petr. He gets a title shot. He makes the most of it. He beats Aljamain Sterling at UFC 292. And leading into that fight, people were already saying, Sean O'Malley's a star. Sean O'Malley's a draw. And, you know, he's going to do so great if he becomes champion. He's going to take that next step. And in the lead up to the fight, and a lot of people, you can go back and look at some of my videos where I mentioned this guy said Sean O'Malley isn't a draw. It seems like the fan base is starting to come around to what I'm saying. But what's so hard to kind of dissect about this topic is the word draw, as well as the word star, in the MMA community has been so perverted over the past 5, 6, 7 years, where it really doesn't mean what it used to mean back in the day. So it's really hard to kind of decipher it. But basically, a star used to be, okay, they're known amongst a large percentage of casual fans. They sell a lot of pay-per-views. And essentially, they can get really close to that 1 million pay-per-view buys, if not over 1 million pay-per-view buys. That was a star. Conor McGregor is a star. And then draw was really like over 500, over 600,000 pay-per-view buys. Back in the day, we used to get actual numbers of what was a pay-per-view star, or the numbers for the pay-per-view, so we could kind of see, okay, who's a draw, who's not a draw. But over the last few years, you got people calling Colby Covington a draw. You have so many examples of people saying, this guy's a draw, this guy's a draw. Look at his YouTube views. Look at this, look at that. And it's just simply not true. So for the longest time, I've been saying, look, Sean O'Malley has potential to reach, you know, star power or become a draw. But right now, he's just not there. And after UFC 292, where he knocked out Aljamain Sterling, that was a pivotal moment in his career to kind of press him towards that star power that he thinks is possible in his mind, but also Dana White and the UFC thinks is possible in their mind. Now, I want to start off, I want to look at two clips. It's going to be two very short clips from Dana White at the UFC 292 post-fight presser. One is super relevant to the video. The second one we're going to look at. The other one is somewhat relevant, but it's also just hilarious. Dana White straight up lying through his teeth about Dana White privilege. And I figured, you know what? I watched through this. I found this. let's take a look at it again. So let's take a look at it, and then we'll come back and react to it.
Dana White privilege. You don't become number 2 in the world without earning it. So, and I don't pick that. You people do. So then he went in there and delivered tonight. Yeah. There is no such thing as Dana White privilege in this company. You know, they can do that type of shit in boxing. If you make it to the top here and you get to a title shot, you've earned it here.
There's no such thing as Dana White privilege. And also, if you make it to the top and you make it to a title shot, you've earned it. That bout blew me away. I know Dana White says stuff that isn't true all the time, but how ironic is that looking back on that now that we're getting Sean O'Malley versus Marlon Vera too? Marlon Vera is 1-1 in his last 2 fights. That's just insanity. In no way, shape, or form does Marlon Vera deserve a title shot, okay? And as far as Dana White privilege exists. I mean, oh, you don't get a title shot unless you've earned it. First off, Sean O'Malley got 1 robbery win over Petr. Yeah, he really earned it, didn't he? He really earned it. On top of that, what about Colby Covington, UFC 296? What about Sean Strickland, UFC 293? What about Marlon Vera, which I just discussed, for UFC 299? None of those guys were even remotely close to have earning a title shot outside of O'Malley, but he still shouldn't have been quite there. But I didn't have a massive problem with that like we have with some of these other undeserved title shots. And then on top of that, look at Sean O'Malley's entire career. Raulian Paiva, Chris Montino, Thomas Almeida. The crazy thing is, Sean O'Malley's entire UFC resume, he's been in the UFC for a while. Only 2 wins are still in the UFC. One's Aljamain Sterling, the other's Petr. The one over Petr, in my opinion, is completely delegitimized because he did not win that fight, but it doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. That's irrelevant. The next clip I want to look at is a media member asking Dana White about Sean O'Malley's star power, and you can already see the shit-eating grin on Dana White's face. Dana White was tickled pink the night of UFC 292. He was so happy wrapping that belt around Sean O'Malley. And he kind of goes on a little bit of a diatribe here talking about Sean O'Malley's potential star power. And is he already a star? And how many pay-per-view buys did he sell for UFC 292? Let's take a look at what he had to say.
Broke the all-time gate record here. Bruce Springsteen just played here and did 5 million. We did over 7 million. Okay, with the Boston Garden. We're the biggest thing other than the craziest fucking sports town on earth, other than their team that plays here. We're the biggest thing that's ever been here. So what does that tell you about O'Malley? This is also the biggest bantamweight championship fight ever on pay-per-view globally. It broke the record. Biggest bantamweight championship fight ever. I'm sure you saw the crowd at the end. O'Malley isn't going to be a star. He is a star.
So there you hear from Dana White himself. Sean O'Malley isn't going to be a star. He is a star. And he goes on, before that, he goes on about all the accolades. He broke the record at the Boston Garden, and this was the highest selling bantamweight title fight pay-per-view ever. First off, there hasn't been that many headliners of a pay-per-view with a bantamweight title fight. That speaks to Sean O'Malley's popularity. But also, he doesn't give out specific numbers. Aljamain Sterling has already come out and said, look, I did this quick turnaround because I thought I was going to get a lot of money from the pay-per-view sales, and it wasn't that good. And I said going into that fight, Sean O'Malley was not a star. He wasn't going to sell these massive amount of pay-per-views that Dana White and the UFC was alluding to. And the point I'm getting to here is the UFC tries to promote these guys in a way, and I wish there was a term for it. Maybe there is a term. Somebody can let me know. But essentially, it's perception is reality. That's the way the UFC tries to promote certain guys. They look at Sean O'Malley. They believe he has star potential. And what Dana White is doing is just acting as if it's true, and it's fake it till you make it. Oh, this guy is a star. Did you see the crowd? Oh my God, they were shouting from their seats in a live event. Couldn't believe my eyes. And then he's like, highest selling bantamweight pay-per-view ever. This guy is a star. But the reality is Dana White's just telling you that so that then you can be like, oh, you know what? Maybe he is a star. Maybe his next fight I can't miss because everyone else is going to watch it. And the media runs with it because the media is lackeys to Dana White and the UFC. Because at the end of the day, and this applies to MMA YouTubers as well, not necessarily me, because I don't buy into all that stuff, but the media wants there to be stars born in the UFC because it indirectly makes them more money, it makes their job more relevant, and it gives them more opportunities. So as much as Dana White and other, UFC employees or shareholders or whatever you want to call them, want there to be these massive draws and pay-per-view stars, so does the MMA media. So they kind of run with it a bit. And even the question, you didn't see the question in the clip. He's like, we've already seen his massive numbers. I mean, is he becoming a star? And it's just simply not true. Sean O'Malley has not proven yet that he is a star. I can unequivocally say that. But when it comes to UFC 299 and people saying the UFC stacking this card because, they want to prove that Sean O'Malley is a draw. That's just not the case. First off, they don't release pay-per-view numbers ever. So even if this card was stacked so much it was going to elevate the pay-per-view numbers, the pay-per-view numbers are private anyway. We don't get those numbers. So that's just not true. And also, I get the card stacked, but you can go back and look at other cards. For example, a lot of the MMA community said Colby Covington's a draw. He's a star. People don't really say star. They more say draw for Colby Covington, which just isn't factually true at all because we have reliable pay-per-view numbers for Colby Covington, under 400,000 pay-per-view buys from the Sports Business Review Journal. Okay? Colby's not a draw, but a lot of fans in the UFC kind of acted like, he's a draw. The media acted like he was a draw. They were like, that's why he's getting an undeserved title shot. Look at UFC 296, even with Colby as this quote-unquote draw, UFC 296 is absolutely stacked with incredible fights. Alexandre Pantoja versus Brandon Royval, which I get isn't like some mega, fight by any means, but you look at the card, it's really filled out with incredible fights. Shavkat Rakhmonov, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, Paddy Pimblett, Tony Ferguson, Josh Emmett, Bryce Mitchell. I understand that's not on the level of UFC 299, but if you go back even further, UFC 295 was supposed to be John Jones versus Stipe Miocic. That was an incredible card as well. You had Yuri Prohaska versus Alex Pereira underneath of it. That's an easy pay-per-view headliner by itself. Then you go back UFC 294. UFC 294 was crazy stacked. Islam Makhachev, Alexander Volkanovski, co-main event, Hamzat Chimaev, Kamaru Usman. And those fights were put together after other fights fell out that were even better than those fights. And you go through the rest of the main card stacked. Islam Makhachev, they're not trying to prove that Islam Makhachev's a draw. And then you go to UFC 293. Israel Adesanya, Sean Strickland. That card was absolute horseshit. Absolute horseshit. Co-main events, Alexander Volkov, Tai Tuivasa. I just threw up in my mouth a little bit just thinking about this pay-per-view card. Israel Adesanya is considered a star. He's considered a draw. So, why people are saying, they're just trying to prove that O'Malley's a draw, I don't think that's the case. I think they're actively admitting that he's not a star because they're trying to build him into one. They're trying to build him into one because if you already do decent pay-per-view buys, like, I know it's kind of hard because I've talked about it. The definition of star and draw have kind of been perverted over the years. Based on the old definition, Israel Adesanya is not a star. He's just kind of a draw. He probably does, depending on the opponent, somewhere between 600, 800,000 pay-per-view buys. Maybe if he gets a really, massive fight, maybe the Dricus du Plessis fight would do over 1 million. That's how big that fight would be. And look at the card underneath of him. It's garbage. You go back, you look at Conor McGregor, who's one true star in the UFC. You go back and look at his most recent pay-per-views. UFC 264, absolute dog shit. UFC 257, absolutely horrible. UFC 246, absolutely horrible. So when you have a star, when you have a drawing power on the top of a card, typically you get really crappy cards underneath of it. That's literally just what happens. So the UFC is not trying to convince you that he's a star. They're not trying to tell you that he's a star. Dana White is a little bit, but not with the card, not with the bout order that they've put together, which, by the way, doesn't even draw in a whole lot of casuals anyway, maybe a little bit from Dustin Poirier, but that's about it. There's people who watch the sport on a semi-regular basis who have never even heard of Benoit Saint-Denis, okay? What they're trying to do is they're using this as an opportunity to build Sean O'Malley into that star. They're giving him that push, and they're trying to give him every opportunity to take that leap and have that huge moment in his career that elevates him into a star and drawing power. And they want to have as many fans watching as possible. That's what they're doing. Let me go back and give you some examples. I've watched them do this time and time again. First off, something similar. It's a little bit different of a situation. Back at UFC 264, Sean O'Malley's on the pay-per-view main card against Chris Montino. That was O'Malley's opportunity to get some exposure on a massive card like Conor McGregor's. That's what they did there. But some examples, UFC 189, Conor McGregor versus Chad Mendes. This card was absolutely stacked. This was when Conor was kind of at that fork in the road. Don't get me wrong, he was popular. He was a draw at this point, but he hadn't taken that leap yet. He wasn't nowhere near the star or drawing power that he is today. Cards absolutely stacked. He wins that fight. He earns the star power a bit, but he's still not a massive star just yet. If you didn't watch back then, you really don't know. Don't get me wrong, he was a big name, but he hadn't become that huge star that, you kind of, give to him today, when you call him a star. Then you look at UFC 194, Conor's next fight after 189. Conor McGregor, Jose Aldo. Absolutely crazy stacked fight card. And it's hard if you've become a fan in the last couple of years looking back on these cards and saying, this card looks like crap because you don't know half the fighters. I remember thinking at the time, UFC 194 was the greatest fight card ever put together on paper. So say what you will about it now. It looked amazing back then. I thought it was the best fight card I'd ever seen on paper up until that point. So the point I'm trying to make here is the UFC is admitting at UFC 299 that Sean O'Malley's not a star. They're going to lie to you and say that he is. Dana White's going to lie to you and say that he is. But they see the potential in Sean O'Malley. They see him as a guy who attracts a young male audience. He's a guy that's on social media and he's a streamer and he's kicking it with the Nelk boys. He's not kicking it with Clay Guida and his boys. He's kicking it with the Nelk boys and all these kind of influencer types. And Dana White's really high on that. He's like, oh yeah, Power Slap's a juggernaut because it gets all these TikTok views and whatnot. Dana looks at Sean O'Malley and sees star potential. So, you know what? He's going to build this card around him, but that's not the only reason. That's not the real reason they're doing this. That's one of the reasons they're doing this. But they want to propel Sean O'Malley into superstardom. And all that needs to happen for Sean O'Malley now is a couple more big wins. It could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 3. But they're going to put him on fight cards that have kind of that it factor, that draw in a decent amount of hardcores and a little bit of casuals. And then if Sean O'Malley's able to go out there and perform, he will easily become, he's already a low-tier draw in my opinion. He's already a very low-tier draw. Like we're talking probably 400 to 500,000 pay-per-view buys. With this card, potentially even a little bit more. But they're waiting for that moment for him to become this mega draw. But the thing that people really aren't talking about is what's going on with the UFC and ESPN. And I wanted to make a video about this. And then I was thinking about this topic and people were bringing this topic up to me. And I said, you know what? This is the perfect video to discuss it in. Because it's the real reason this card is stacked. And I believe UFC pay-per-views in 2024, I think the majority of pay-per-views in 2024 will look amazing. I think we'll be like, you know what? Are pay-per-views getting better and fight night cards getting worse? I think that's going to be something we're going to be saying in 2024. And the reason why that is happening is because the UFC has a deal with ESPN that they signed back in 2018. And essentially what it does, and we don't have any specific numbers, but essentially what it does is the UFC hands off all their content to ESPN, including their pay-per-views. ESPN pays the UFC a flat rate for that, and then ESPN is collecting the profits from the pay-per-views. And there's probably some escalations in there. Like, for example, this is kind of the rumor that was being kind of floated out there by multiple legitimate sources years ago, that basically the deal accumulated to ESPN paid the UFC a flat rate of 500K pay-per-view buys, regardless of how many sales the pay-per-view actually did. And then after that, it goes to 600, 700, 800,000 million pay-per-view buys, depending on who's in the card, Conor McGregor. Then they have some type of split profit after that total where the UFC gets a share as well as ESPN. But guess what? That deal expires in 2025. The UFC is going to be either trying to renegotiate with ESPN or they're going to be looking for a new suitor. And guess what they're going to want? They're going to want a lot of high pay-per-view sales to justify getting a larger deal with whatever entity that they sign with. So I believe in 2024, and we've kind of already seen this outside of UFC 297, which was absolute crap. 298, unbelievably stacked. 299, unbelievably stacked. 300, unbelievably stacked. We'll see what 301 looks like. We'll see what 302 looks like. But I believe you'll see fight night cards get worse in 2024. I believe you'll see pay-per-views get better because guess what? ESPN has to share those numbers with the UFC. The UFC is going to use those numbers to renegotiate a new deal with ESPN because that deal is up in 2025. That is the real reason I believe you're going to see a lot of stacked pay-per-view cards in 2024, and you're going to see a lot of fight night cards suffer. It just came out today, late April, another Apex card. You're going to see plenty of Apex cards this year because at the end of the day, the Apex cards don't matter. They're not drawing in pay-per-view revenue. So I think you'll see this year the UFC stacking a lot of cards like UFC 299 because they want to up their numbers, up their average pay-per-view sales, so they can take that to the negotiating table against ESPN or if they sign with another company. Who knows? They might end up live and free exclusively on Rumble. I doubt they're free, but they could end up live on Rumble, if they so choose. If ESPN isn't willing to cough up what the UFC and Dana White thinks that they are worth. But I believe it's a mix of everything, but I truly believe the real reason that they're stacking a lot of these cards is the exclusive negotiate, or not the exclusive negotiating, it's the negotiations back and forth between the UFC and ESPN. And a lot of people don't realize 2025, UFC could leave ESPN. They could head somewhere else. I don't know where they could go. There's many streaming homes now, and there's all these different things. They could go anywhere. But that's why they are stacking the card. They're not stacking it to convince you O'Malley is a star. They're going to tell you O'Malley's a star. It doesn't matter if this card was shit. Dana White's going to come out and say, highest, gate ever, and the ticket sales this and ticket sales that, and O'Malley really performed well, blah, 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 blah. And they're going to baby him with an undeserved title shot against Marlon Vera because he's a more favorable matchup than a guy like Merab. And then they're stacking the pay-per-view to help them with their negotiations, but also if O'Malley gets a viral KO or O'Malley has this phenomenal performance, it helps elevate his star power because all he needs to do is keep winning and he will become a star in the UFC. Even though I don't particularly believe right now he's close to a star, he's a very low-level draw for the UFC right now. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And thank you so much for watching.